The sound of the plate shattering was louder than the music. Porcelain hit hardwood and exploded at my feet, white shards skidding under the dining table like startled insects. The room went silent for half a heartbeat, just long enough for everyone to look at me. Not in concern. In annoyance. I stood there, hands still wrapped around a dessert plate, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was knocking against my ribs, trying to escape. The Christmas lights flickered softly above us, warm and forgiving, completely out of sync with the tension that had just snapped tight across the room. I said. My granddaughter laughed, her voice light, careless, cruel in the way people are when they don't think consequences apply to them. Older people really shouldn't take up so much space. She smiled like she'd told a joke worth repeating. Her cousins snickered. Someone coughed. Someone else reached for their wine. No one corrected her. I bent down slowly and began gathering the broken pieces, my knees protesting, my fingers trembling just enough to notice. I half expected someone to stop me, to say, "Mom, let me help." Or that was out of line. Or even just my name. Nothing. That's when I knew. This wasn't about a joke. This was about erasure. I placed the shards carefully into the trash, wiped my hands on my apron and smiled. The kind of smile women learn when they've been underestimated for so long it becomes muscle memory. "Excuse me," I said gently. "I left something in the car." No one looked up. I walked down the hallway, slipped on my coat, picked up my purse, and stepped out into the cold night without another word. What none of them realized, what made that moment almost funny in a dark, poetic way, was that every single gift under that glittering tree belonged to me. Not emotionally, legally, financially, entirely. And by the time they noticed I was gone, it would already be too late. 3 hours earlier, I had been basting the ham. Christmas Eve had always been my domain. My rules. My rhythm. Soft lights, clean counters, candles that smelled like pine and oranges. The long walnut dining table. My mother's table. Polished until it reflected the glow of the chandelier like a promise. I'd spent 2 full days cooking. Creamed potatoes whipped just right. Cranberry relish chilling in glass bowls. 3 pies cooling behind me like loyal soldiers waiting for deployment. I moved through the kitchen with the quiet confidence of a woman who had done this longer than anyone at that table had been alive. My name is Eleanor Price. I'm in my late 60s. Retired archivist. Widow. The woman who made holidays happen even when no one noticed how much effort it took. I used to think that was enough. My daughter Janine arrived late, as usual, heels clicking, phone pressed to her ear. Her boyfriend followed behind her carrying a bottle of wine he'd definitely been told to bring. My granddaughter Sloane swept in last, eyes glued to her screen, coat tossed onto my favorite chair like it was a hook. No hello. Just noise. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself people were busy. I told myself all the lies women like me are taught to repeat, so we don't inconvenience anyone with our feelings. Dinner began smoothly enough. Compliments floated past me like polite smoke. The ham was good. The potatoes were perfect. Someone joked about how classic my decorations were. Classic. Retro. Safe words people use when they mean outdated. I laughed when I was expected to laugh. Nodded when I was expected to nod. And all the while, something inside me was quietly detaching. Because what no one at that table knew, what I had never said out loud, was that Sloane's education, her apartment, her books, her independence, were being quietly financed by me. Not by loans. Not by scholarships. By a separate account with my name on it. I had sold things for that money. Important things. I had done it silently, because love to me had always meant without witnesses. Until that night. Until a careless sentence stripped away the last illusion I was clinging to. When I stepped outside into the freezing air, my breath came out sharp and white. The driveway glittered with frost. Somewhere behind me, laughter rose again, already forgetting I had ever been part of the room. Inside my coat pocket, my fingers brushed against an envelope. I stopped walking, pulled it out. A single check. Enough to cover the next stretch of tuition. Enough to keep the illusion going just a little longer. I stared at it. Then I tore it cleanly in half. Once. Twice. Again. The paper fell like snow at my feet. Not in anger. In clarity. That was the moment the story changed. And this quiet, invisible exit, was only the beginning. No one called that night. I didn't expect them to rush out into the snow, shouting my name, suddenly struck by remorse like something out of a holiday movie. I've lived long enough to know life doesn't correct itself that neatly. Still, I stood in my kitchen, coat still on, watching the clock blink toward midnight, and waited. Silence has weight when you finally stop filling it. At some point I poured myself a glass of red wine I'd been saving for company and drank it alone. The tree lights blinked softly behind me, reflecting off the ornaments I'd polished that morning. Beneath the branches, the gifts sat untouched, wrapped with care, labeled in my neat handwriting. Every single one of them paid for by me. I didn't move them. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I went to bed. Sleep didn't come. Instead, memories did. The kind that arrive uninvited when you finally stop distracting yourself with service. I thought about the first time I realized something was off. It hadn't been Christmas. It had been early autumn. I'd baked a loaf of banana bread, still warm, wrapped in foil the way Sloane used to love when she was little. She'd texted that she'd be home for the weekend, and I thought I'd surprise her. Nothing big. Just a visit. Just me. When I knocked, no one answered. I waited, smiling at nothing, listening to voices inside. Then the door opened and there she was, crop top, oversized hoodie, phone pressed to her ear. "Oh hey," she said, half covering the receiver. "My grandma just showed up with banana bread." She laughed. "So vintage, right?" "Vintage." I stepped inside, still smiling, still pretending my chest hadn't tightened. She took the bread, thanked me without looking, set it down like an item on a to-do list, and kept scrolling. No hook. No real conversation. No curiosity. When I complimented her outfit, she smirked. Yeah, people my age appreciate good genetics. It wasn't what she said. It was how effortlessly she said it. Like I was a footnote in my own lineage. That was the first crack. After that, the distance grew quietly. Messages went unanswered. Invitations stopped coming. Family plans were made without me and explained away later as misunderstandings. At Thanksgiving, I brought my signature dish and watched everyone praise someone else's store-bought contribution. When I offered to help clean up, no one noticed when I dropped a plate. I cleaned the shards myself, hands shaking, while conversation rolled on without me. That's how invisibility works. Not with cruelty, with indifference. By the time Christmas arrived, I was already fading. I just hadn't admitted it yet. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A group message. "Thanks for dinner last night, Mom. Everything was lovely." A dancing holiday emoji followed. That was it. I stared at the screen, waiting for the rest of the sentence that never came. "No, where did you go? No, are you okay? No, we're sorry." I wasn't missed. I was convenient. That realization settled over me like frost. Later that morning, I packed every single gift into my car. Scarves, gadgets, books, jewelry, all of it. I drove to the return counters one by one. No drama. No speeches. Just quiet efficiency. At the bank, the clerk smiled politely as I closed the education account I'd opened years ago under my own name. "Would you like to notify the beneficiary?" she asked. I smiled back. "No," I said. "She'll notice soon enough." And that unexpectedly made me laugh. Dark humor sneaks up on you when you finally stop being afraid of consequences. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat down. Not to plan. Not to fix. Not to anticipate anyone else's needs. Just to sit. I looked around my home, the house I paid off myself, the one filled with decades of unacknowledged labor and love, and felt something unfamiliar. Ownership. That night, I found the envelope. Tucked behind old photo albums. Yellowed. Familiar handwriting. My husband's. He'd written it decades ago. I must have hidden it there without realizing it. The letter didn't scold. It didn't soothe. It reminded me who I was before I learned to disappear for the comfort of others. I cried then. Not because I felt small, but because I finally remembered I wasn't. And that's when the plan formed. Not revenge. Something far more unsettling. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't slam doors or raise its voice. Real power moves silently, rearranging the room while everyone else is still arguing about the furniture. The morning after I found the letter, I woke before dawn. Not from anxiety. From clarity. For the first time in years, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check messages that wouldn't be there. I made coffee slowly, the good kind, and watched pale winter light stretch across the kitchen floor. The house felt different. Not emptier. Quieter. And in that quiet, I began taking my life back, one small deliberate action at a time. I started with my calendar. Every standing obligation I had kept out of habit rather than desire went first. Weekly dinners. Errand favors. Can you just requests that had somehow become permanent? I canceled without explanation. The world didn't collapse. Then I went to the garden. The rose bushes were brittle, all thorns and memory. I trimmed away what was dead, not with sadness, but intention. When you stop forcing something to survive, you give it a chance to rest. I realized I'd never allowed myself that. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop and began writing. Not emails. Not apologies. Stories. Pages filled quickly once I stopped censoring myself. About motherhood. About loss. About how women like me become invisible by being too reliable. I didn't write for anyone else. That made all the difference. The first ripple came sooner than I expected. 3 days after Christmas, my daughter Janine called. I let it ring. Not out of spite. Out of boundaries. When she didn't leave a voicemail, I smiled. That told me everything I needed to know. If she needed me, she'd try again. If she just wanted reassurance that I was still available, she'd move on. She moved on. A week later, the second ripple arrived, louder. A credit alert. I was in the middle of shelving books at the community library when my phone buzzed sharply in my coat pocket. I didn't look at it right away. I finished placing the book where it belonged first. Then I checked the screen. Declined transaction. I laughed out loud. Not because I was cruel, but because timing is a beautiful thing when you stop rushing it. Later that evening, my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't subtle. Multiple calls. Missed messages. Urgency bleeding through every notification. I didn't respond. I poured myself tea, sat by the fire, and read another chapter of my book. Let them feel it. That's when I understood something important. They hadn't lost me. They had lost access. And that scared them far more. The next day, Janine showed up at my door unannounced. She stood on the porch holding groceries like a peace offering, her smile tight, rehearsed. "You've been hard to reach," she said. "I've been busy," I replied calmly. She stepped inside and paused. My house hadn't changed. But she had. The absence of apology, the lack of urgency on my part, it unsettled her. We sat at the kitchen table while the kettle boiled. She circled the issue without naming it. Talked about stress. About pressure. About how Sloane was just young and didn't mean anything by it. I let the silence stretch. Finally she said it. "She's confused," Janine admitted. "About the tuition." I met her eyes. "Confusion comes from assumptions," I said. "Not from cruelty." That landed. For the first time, she looked uncomfortable, not angry, not defensive, just uncertain. I didn't explain myself. I didn't justify my decision. I didn't rescue her from the discomfort. And that was the moment the power fully shifted. Not when I took the money back, but when I stopped trying to make them comfortable at my expense. That night, I received an email. The scholarship fund I'd quietly established in my husband's name had already been awarded to its first recipient. A young woman with no safety net. No backup plan. No invisible benefactor cushioning her fall. She wrote, "Thank you for believing in someone no one else noticed." I cried then. Not from grief. From fullness. Because for the first time in a long time, I was giving to people who saw me back. And I wasn't shrinking to do it. She asked to meet me. Not in person at first. Not bravely. A message passed through her mother like a fragile package no one wanted to drop. She just wants to talk. Only if you're open to it. I stared at the words longer than I needed to. I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me. Anger burns hot and fast. What I felt now was cooler. Cleaner. Like standing on the far side of a storm and realizing the house didn't fall. It just rearranged itself. I typed back slowly. Tell her Thursday. At noon. In the garden. I chose the garden on purpose. It wasn't neutral ground. It was mine. Thursday came bright and cold. The kind of day that makes everything painfully clear. The roses, once brittle and brown, had begun to wake. Small buds pushed through thorny stems, stubborn and alive. I was already there when she arrived. She looked different. Not dressed differently, still fashionable, still young but quieter. Smaller somehow. Like someone who had just learned the world didn't bend automatically in her direction. Hi, she said. I nodded. Hello. She sat beside me on the bench, hands folded tightly in her lap. For a moment neither of us spoke. I let the silence do the work. Silence reveals who came prepared and who came rehearsed. I read what you wrote, she said finally. The piece you published. I didn't respond. She swallowed. I didn't know you felt like that. About everything. That, I said gently, is part of the problem. Her eyes filled but she didn't cry. I respected that. I didn't realize how much you did, she said. I just thought it was always there. I smiled then. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Truthfully. That's what roots are, I said. Invisible. Until the tree starts to fall. She nodded slowly, like the words were rearranging something inside her. I'm not asking for the money back, she rushed to say. I swear. Losing it made everything real. And losing you, her voice cracked. That was worse. There it was. Not entitlement. Awareness. I believed her. And still, belief doesn't erase consequence. I love you, I said. That hasn't changed. Hope flickered in her eyes. But, I continued calmly, love doesn't mean access. It doesn't mean funding. And it doesn't mean pretending I didn't hear what you said. Her shoulders sagged. I can forgive you, I said. And still choose myself. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I understand. That mattered more than an apology. We talked for a while after that. About expectations. About age. About how cruelty can sound like humor when you've never been held accountable for your words. I told her about the scholarship fund. About the girl who would attend school because of it. She needed it more, my granddaughter said quietly. Yes, I replied. And I needed this. When we stood to leave, she hugged me carefully. Not out of habit. Out of respect. It was enough. Later that evening my daughter called. Not frantic. Not demanding. Measured. I didn't realize how much we leaned on you, she admitted. Without noticing. I know, I said. Silence hung between us. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, she said. They won't, I replied. But they might go forward better. She didn't argue. That night, I changed the locks on my doors. Not because I was afraid. Because symbols matter. I had spent a lifetime handing out keys to people who treated my space like a convenience. Now entry required something different. Respect. And the most unsettling part? I slept better than I had in years. Peace doesn't arrive with applause. It slips in when you stop explaining yourself. The days after that conversation were ordinary in the best way. No dramatic texts. No emotion el bargaining. No sudden overcorrections pretending everything was fine again. Just space. And for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to fill it. I kept my mornings slow. Tea by the window. Writing while the house was still asleep. On Tuesdays, I volunteered at the library again. The children didn't know my history or my sacrifices. They just knew my voice made stories feel real. That was enough. The scholarship fund grew quietly. Another recipient was approved. Then another. Each thank you letter felt different from the ones I'd received before. These weren't polite acknowledgments. They were recognition. I had mattered all along. I'd just been giving my worth away to people who confused presence with permanence. My daughter came by once, weeks later. She knocked this time. We sat at the kitchen table like equals. No roles. No expectations. She asked about my writing. I told her the truth. I was finally writing the story I'd lived instead of the one I'd been assigned. She didn't ask me to host anything. She didn't ask me to help with anything. Progress doesn't always look like closeness. Sometimes it looks like restraint. My granddaughter sent a message eventually. Not a request. Not an update. Just a sentence. I think about what you said more than you know. I didn't reply right away. Not because I didn't care. Because I no longer trained people to expect immediate access to me. When I did respond, it was simple. I hope you're learning how to take up space without pushing others out. That was the lesson. Not punishment. Not revenge. Not silence as a weapon. Boundaries as truth. Spring came slowly. The garden bloomed unevenly, imperfect, stubborn. Roses in places I didn't expect. Empty soil where something never returned. Life is like that. One evening, I sat on the porch wrapped in a light shawl, watching the sky turn soft and violet. I thought about the woman I had been. How carefully I folded myself to fit into rooms where I was only tolerated. I thought about the night I left without saying goodbye. I hadn't disappeared. I had withdrawn my labor. There's a difference. Some people only notice your value when you stop supplying it. That doesn't make you cruel. It makes you awake. I still love my family, but I no longer disappear for them. I no longer confuse giving with being seen. And I no longer apologize for the space I take up. Because here's the truth no one teaches women like me. Roots don't chase trees that grow tall. They hold steady. And now, finally, I was holding myself. Please click the subscribe button, like, share and comment. This will encourage me to make more interesting stories. Also, let's know where you are watching from. Thank you and see you in the next story.